Matters, sponsored by DatacomIT. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm hosting and recording this webinar from the lands of the Yugambeh language region of the Gold Coast. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. Please ensure your camera is off, you are muted. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the team chat or wait for the Q&A session after the presentation. This session will be recorded. The presentation, transcript and resources will be shared after the webinar. And without further ado, I would like to introduce today's presenter, John Cox. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Tyndall. Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, which is hosted by RIMPA Global and supported by DatacomIT on scanning versus preservation digitisation. What's the difference and why it matters? So I'm John Cox. I'm a local ambassador for RIMPA Global and business development manager for DatacomIT here in Canberra. Apologies, I have a little tickle and a bit of a cold today. So yeah, thank you to RIMPA Global for hosting today's event and to DatacomIT for supporting it. We're delighted to have you with us today to explore this important distinctions between the often confused approaches to digitisation. Whether you're working in records management, archives, libraries, museums, or simply have an interest in digitisation and digital preservation, this session is designed to shed light on the practical and strategic implications of your digitisation choices. Over the next hour, we'll unpack the key differences between scanning for access and digitising for long-term preservation, discussing why the differences matter and offer guidance on how to make informed decisions that align with your organisation's goals. We encourage you to ask questions in the chat. Make most of this opportunity to engage with like-minded people and myself. Okay, let's get started. So, as I said, I'm John Cox. I'm Business Development Manager for DatacomIT here in Canberra, or DatacomIT, as I'm told is the correct pronunciation. And I'm known for my work here in Canberra on digitisation projects, normally for government. Just so I'm sure most people know, but RIMPA Global are the information and records management peak body. And DatacomIT, we're leaders in digitisation, including preservation digitisation, but also collection management and digital preservation solutions. So, yeah, as a business development manager working in digitisation here in Canberra, over the course of my career, I have gained a unique insight into these two things. So I started my career for the DX in the UK, and then similarly did the same thing in Perth, and then came to Canberra to do e-discovery and government digitisation. I was the account manager for what was then HP Trim. Back then it was version 7.8, so any Trim users amongst you will know how long ago that was. It's now Content Manager. I've also worked for some of the box carriers. I worked for Grace for a while and TIMG. And I also worked for Fujifilm Data Management Solutions, who are more into BPO and time-sensitive projects like election scanning. And now with DatacomIT, so we're leaders in digitisation and digital preservation solutions, as well as software, hardware. And having worked for those different organisations, I think that does give me unique insight into scanning, so BAU digitisation, preservation digitisation, and often hybrid projects that involve both of those. We're going to be touching on some key concepts today that will be sort of repeated through the session. So outsourced versus insourced, and then the interactions to when you change the purpose or spec or reasons that you're doing this type of work. So things like scale, efficiency, risk, security, whether that be physical, logistical or cyber security, the governance framework, privacy. I'm dealing with private identifying information, things like the right to be forgotten, or even culturally sensitive issues. Be touching on the Australian and international standards. Here in Australia, we have the NAA BAU standard, business as usual standard, and the preservation standard. Internationally, there's things like FADGI, which is often used by libraries that have international interlibrary sharing, so need to share a standard. And also on technology, so scanners, cameras, EDRMS, digital preservation software, case management software, things like OCR, ICR, and of course, AI. So the key differences are on the screen here now. So general scanning is about making a digital copy. Preservation digitization is about making a high quality digital surrogate that will be kept for hopefully forever or for the very long term, with a goal of reducing the handling of the physical item. And there's other reasons as well. What will we going back to, I think quite there'll be a repeating pattern on this, is the dichotomy between records management and archiving. So just to get our definitions, records management implies supervision and administration of physical and digital business records through their life cycle. So from creation, distribution, archiving and disposal. Whereas archiving is the storing for long term and is meant for storing files and artifacts that are no longer going to be changed or need to be changed. They're closed by definition. BAU scanning, the process of creating digital copies of a physical document, normally for ease of access and distribution. And this is what the NAA says about business as usual scanning. It says digitisation occurs as a business as usual process. So inbound mail or invoicing that often will typically be ingested into a business system. They might be destroyed under the General Records Authority, GRA 31, and the source records are of temporary value. It's ephemera. Digital preservation, on the other hand, is a more meticulous process aimed at creating a high-quality digital surrogate that can stand in for the original item, ensuring long-term preservation. And the NAA says about this, the preservation digitisation standards for physical archival of RNA or long-term records are applicable on all projects, whether they're in-sourced or outsourced. The standards ensure that the high-quality digital surrogate is created of the materials, as well as a derivative for access files. So this is all designed to reduce the wear on source records. So the difference between the two types of records, BAU scanning records, it's often as part of the life cycle management, often within an EDRMS or records management system, for chain of custody, allowing you to dispose of the original for ease of freedom information, fulfilling freedom of information or FOI requests. But also things like e-discovery, searchability, and making information available, and so you can aggregate it and do analysis for decision making, but also things like payroll, expense claims, insurance claims, and application, and more for AI, for use in AI. Preservation digitisation is about maintaining the quality and integrity and the provenance, creating that digital surrogate, as well as quality. So the reasons you might want to do that is because you don't want to change that document. You want to avoid obsolescence. You might want to create an immersive experience online. So if people can't make it to your cultural institution, it might be for 3D imaging, for recreation of art or for academic reasons. If you've got a piece of art and you want to digitize it, you can then reproduce that and blow it up really large because you've got a high quality digital version of that file item. So this table summarizes those differences. So as we've touched on, the primary goal for general scanning is generally convenience, access and sharing, preservation, digitization, long-term preservation. The image quality on this is the real kicker. Generally speaking, for general scanning, it's based on your user case. There is a BAU standard, as I've mentioned, from the National Archives, but generally speaking, it's going to be something like 300 dpi and a multi-page PDFA or a JPEG. With the preservation, you're creating single-page TIFFs. They're 400 dpi's, and those are the masters, and generally they're what will be archived. With a derivative access file, which is normally smaller, that would be a JPEG or a PDFA, depending on what you need. The standards, as I mentioned, there is a BAU standard. There are other standards around evidence handling and whatnot that are very similar for general scanning. But for preservation, you've got the NAA digitisation standard that I've mentioned, but also international standards. So FADGI is the international standard, comes out of the federal government in America. ISO, but also out of the GLAM institutions. So galleries, libraries and museums will often have their own guidelines, and often handling guidelines are done on a series by series basis. So yeah, that's very similar with the handling guidelines. It's per user case, and as I mentioned with preservation scanning, those handling guidelines are a lot more meticulous and are all designed to prevent damage to the original document, and it speaks about making sure that you're not changing the intrinsic value of that source material. So the use of things like overhead cameras, book cradles and so forth. The metadata, I think the metadata, again, it really does depend on the user case with the general scanning. With preservation digitization, it's often around keeping that item, because it's by definition a closed item, it's not being touched again. It's around managing obsolescence. It's a digital preservation process as opposed to a life cycle management process. On the technical aspects and challenges, this is I love this picture. This is a DatacomIT facility. You'll see here we've got a couple of we've got a frame and some light sources and an overhead camera, but there's a whole range of different equipment that will be used. With BAU scanning, generally it's an auto feed with a flatbed scanner that would be supplemented with a book scanner or a plan scanner. With preservation work, it will vary wildly. DatacomIT specialise in this type of work, so we have photographic galleries across our 3 sites that are appointed with studios like this that can be configured in different ways depending on what you're handling. And then it will depend whether you're handling paper, and we are primarily talking about paper today, just to be clear, but also microfiche, microfilm. Also, DatacomIT sell hardware and software. Generally speaking, the equipment that we sell will be for low volume or for scan on demand or different readers if it's for microfilm. And then the difference in resolution and file format of the images that you created will depend on will be based on the equipment that you're using. So difference in resolution, color accuracy and the file formats, that's really important. The multi-page PDF is a very different thing to the TIFF and the JPEG, and it all comes down to that user case and the governance framework that you're working within. Often when you're outsourcing, most commercial entities will use an auto feed with a flatbed and that's done to manage cost. with DatacomIT, we have a different approach. We have a one-touch approach, which means that the dot prep and the capture are done as a single process. It means there's less points of failure. It means we can essentially do general BAU scanning to the same quality, but without slowing down the throughput as we can preservation work, which means we can do hybrid projects that involve both a lot more readily. And it's just less points of failure and a lot higher quality. The idea of scan once, not having to go back and do heaps of rework. Apologies. So with DatacomIT, obviously the QA process, it's done at the point of capture. It's a lot faster, and you'll see later on we'll break this down. Also, apologies. With insourced, you'll see that we have a range of equipment that you can purchase and software so that you can do the digitisation yourself in-house. You can also provide training and assistance around that. Particularly with preservation digitisation, if you are doing that in-house, it does require a level of expertise. Software. So you'll see here on the screen scanning software. This is the user interface. Anyone that's ever done particularly commercial digitisation will recognise the grey screen. The other picture is I actually put into an AI search scanning software user interface, and this picture is what it came up with. It's actually complete nonsense. The scanning software doesn't look like that at all. I just thought it was interesting that that's what AI would come up with. Okay, so practical applications. So you'll see here we've got a picture of this is an interesting user case. This is the Gutenberg Bible and the Rosetta Stone. Now, I thought this was interesting because it's really a user case that has been captured on the Codex Sinaiticus. And it's a user case that touches on all of the disciplines that we'll be talking about. So it would have started as an oral tradition. It then would have become written on stone, then on skins and paper. So it would have involved conversion, managing obsolescence, translation, comparison, redundancy, having copies, repair and conservation to enable analysis, so that then by the time the printing press came about, we were able to use the disparate parts of in different languages of the Bible to create that single King James type Bible. And I thought that was an interesting user case that shows that all of these practices have been around for a long time, have now coalesced into the modern digitization sector. So just going back to around the software. A lot of the software that we used will be used for automation, and that's really to manage risk and to reduce manual handling. That enables us to extract and capture metadata, do file naming, create folder structure, batching, and tagging. And what we're doing is we're adding structure to unstructured or semi-structured information. That allows for searchability and things like redaction and OCR, and also the automation of reporting and reconciliation, which is really, really important to make sure that everything that we say has been captured, and then it can be put into a business system so that it can be used ongoing. Same thing if it's going to be kept for preservation. That metadata and file structure is going to be very important when we're managing file obsolescence and doing digital preservation. We've touched on best practice around the handling of the items. So really you would want, for preservation digitization, that you're handling delicate historic items. So this involves normally creating specific handling guidelines on a series level to capture to ensure that all the risk and all of the nature of that file is logged in those handling guidelines, so that if you're sending it off to a third party to process, that the decisions about how to handle these items isn't being made by the production staff. It's all documented and ensuring continuity throughout the project. For business as usual, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. So often it'll be things like, do we cut the file covers? Do we not? Are we scanning the whole thing as a single PDF, or are we scanning to file level and naming each of those documents within, to document level within that file? Are we, recreating that? All of that will depend on the business case that that applies to your project. DatacomIT actually employ an in-house conservator, so we can do that work as we go, and we would consult with you on a project-by-project basis, and often by a series or batch-by-batch basis on how to do that conservation work. Similarly, we work with records management practitioners, so for things like the sentencing, manifesting, making sure that all those images and data, often we're doing hundreds of thousands of images and files going into your EDRMS or business systems, making sure that they go in there in the right way, and that they're able to be stored into perpetuity if required, or that they get deleted when needed through the sentencing process. And we're managing huge amounts of file naming, the folder structures I've mentioned, and just ensuring that they're accessible into the future. One thing that we do to ensure the quality of the metadata is we use a checksum. So a checksum is a string of numbers, a unique string of numbers and letters, and it's like a digital footprint. So when you're capturing all the images, you might move them from a production environment to a post-capture environment, maybe then onto a hard drive or an SFTP landing area, and then you'll transfer them across. Each time those images and data are moved, things get corrupted, things change. The checksum ensures that doesn't happen. So you're making sure that the quality of the data, integrity of that is maintained. Also with the software, you're able to do things like managing the audit trail, the tracking, management of PII, ensuring that you're complying with the Privacy and the Archives Act and your internal governance, but also enabling the use of things like AI, OCR and redaction tools. DatacomIT, we understand EDRMS, so content manager, objective, also collection management. If you're looking to have people engage with your collection, we're a reseller for Recollect. And also digital preservation. We have Preserve Card, which I'll be talking about a bit more later on. So just carrying on now with the user case, I've actually used two large projects which have been, one of them is in public domain. The World War II service records are available on the National Archives website through RecFind, but also the service records which came out of the Royal Commission, the requirement to digitise these. So the first case study, so they're both service records. The active records, which haven't been closed and sent to the archives, they were digitised by Defence, and that was done for completeness, accuracy, compliance to regulations, but to make them available for people. There was lots of challenges on that project. DatacomIT digitised 200 million images over a 4 or 5 year period. And over that period, some of the requirements changed. We were dealing with both RNA and BAU, and the scale was enormous. So you can imagine the logistics. But the benefit of that project meant they were discoverable, which led to better outcomes for service personnel and veterans, which is obviously a fantastic thing. With the World War II service records, very different user case. Those items were digitised so that they could be made available for people to look up to find out their family members who have been involved in conflict. That was done by a number of different vendors through the National Archives. All of those records were collected by the archives, who then sent them out to different vendors to digitise. It was one of the first outsourced large preservation digitisation projects. So really the challenges they faced were creating a solution that could do digitisation preservation to scale and maintain the integrity of those images and files. And the benefit was huge. It meant family members could go and find out about their relatives. And I think also it negates ignorance around what actually happens in war. And maybe that would be a useful thing in perhaps preventing future wars. So what I think will come out of being involved to some extent in both of these projects, technology is huge, following the guidelines, understanding governance, understanding the user case and the materials that are being digitized. But often it's about training staff really well and retaining the staff that have a natural proclivity to do this work well. It's keeping good people happy over an extended period of time, because you really want to staff retention. If you're going to market for this type of work, get a handle on the staff retention of the entity that you're getting quotes from, because that's a really good tell to the quality of their work. If they have low staff turnover, it means they're almost certainly doing something right. Oops, apologies. This next slide is very interesting. So this talks about the planning, processing and completion. So the processing is all of the things that I've talked about. That's stage 2. We've found over time that about half of the work is the actual capture, indexing, all of that stuff. A lot of this is about doing good planning. If you can do it, get the sentencing, your scoping study, understanding your collection. What have you got? How many pages? How complex are they? What kind of product do you want to end up with? What do your end users need? It might be that you're digitizing items that are going to be interrogated from your EDRMS regularly. And, a few seconds, if you're doing 100 queries a day, a minute here and a minute there, over years and years, that adds up. So really understanding what your user needs are, understanding the risks and the specifications, do your market research, understand who's who. Look at the panels. I'd say using the NAA panel would be really, really important. Anybody who's on that NAA panel has got on there for a reason. The bar to get on that panel was very high. DatacomIT are on the paper panel, but also on the microfiche, microfilm and photography panel. I think that says something about who we are at DatacomIT, the fact that we're on both of those panels. Also, things like manifesting. You're going to be handing over hundreds of thousands of unique records, making sure you've got a chain of custody, that you're keeping account of those records, and making a business case. So when you're asking for your funding, it's important to have all of this information so that when you go and ask for hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of dollars, that you really understand that business case. And resource allocation. You're going to need to have someone who can prep the files before they go, someone to liaise with the vendor while they're being digitized. And creation of work reports and checksums is a great way to automate that or to semi-automate that process, to make sure you're able to keep track of everything when you come to do the reconciliation. The processing bit we've touched on. So, you've got to understand transport. Are you going to use a secure hand-to-hand courier? If these items are unique, understand what would happen if you lost them, what happened, if they got lost in transit, and use a courier service that's appropriate to that. Understanding the capture process, the equipment that's going to be used, the doc prep process, indexing. Are you going to be using double blind? Are you going to be using a lookup table from the manifest? And also post capture processing, the creation of all of the access derivatives, if it's preservation, the reporting for reconciliation, and chain of custody is very, very important. You want to know who's touched what, when, at any time on the project. Particularly, with all of these documents essentially are evidence. You're dealing with a legal document here. So chain of custody is very, very, very important. And then the completion. How are you going to get the images and data from the vendor securely into the business system? To be frank, if you're ending up with a hard drive that's sat in a safe, can you really say that you're getting value for money? You want that information to be alive and being used, and to be able to interrogate that information, to create an information asset, to make sure you've done your QA. Depending on which part of the government you're from, that will be a requirement with your policy. The reconciliation, are you paying an invoice for? How do you know that you're paying for what's being scanned? The ingestion into your business systems, ongoing management of that, whether it be the life cycle or the digital preservation, the governance that's applied, making sure that all the data is as it should be, and then user training. Once that information is in your business system, make sure that all of the end users are trained on how to access the information, the security and all the governance around it. And again, yeah, the digital preservation of that information is super important, particularly with the proliferation of of information. Just to put it into context, if you've got 200,000 files to be digitized, a 20-second task will add between $50,000 and $100,000 to that project. So if every file had to have a 20-second task, it would be about $60,000, $70,000 added to the cost of that project. So it's a big deal. Okay, digital preservation. This is something that is really, really important and will become more and more important. We have a product called Preservica. So what is digital preservation? Digital preservation is a series of managed activities necessarily to ensure continued access to digital materials as long as they are necessary. So making sure that you identify the file format, doing compatibility checks, and format migration. So you're making sure that you're putting a file into Preservica, you're telling the system what type of file that is, and Preservica will make sure that you're able to open that file into perpetuity. Preservation tracking. So Preservica will actually have some fixity checks and do healing on those files to prevent bit rot. There are other systems that do that, but what Preservica does, it actually does that in a demonstrable way. There's reports. What was healed? When was it healed? Why? What was the issue? So in real time, ongoing, you're able to preserve that digital information. If you've spent millions, hundreds of thousands, or just thousands of dollars on digitizing information, you want to make sure that that information is safe and secure and complete and usable into the long term. And again, that's why that changes monitors, and also the creation of checksums, just to verify the integrity and the authenticity of those digital objects. So whether that's a born digital item, photographs, music, anyone who's got a music collection, anyone that had, CDs and photographs, you'll know, file versions change. You want to be able to open those files and actually use them in different systems. Preservica ensures that you will always be able to do that. So in conclusion, I've got these slides here. I would also like to mention, sorry, by the way, with digital preservation, Preservica actually came out of the UK National Archives. So it's actually been deployed in about 950 archives and collections around the world, including the National Library of Australia, the National Archives, CommBank, and various universities and schools. So just to recap, the key differences between scanning and preservation digitization. General BAU scanning is going to produce PDFs generally or JPEGs. They're going to be a lot smaller file size, but it will come down to the business case that you're using. It's about capture and conversion from analog to digital to allow to do things like OCR and redaction. Also, automation, use of AI. When you do digitization, BAU digitization, it allows you to change those items, reproduce them, and do a lot with them. Digital preservation is about capturing the intrinsic value and creating a digital surrogate file without damaging that original source item. You'll see on the screen here, I've got 4 terms, which I think a lot of people would acknowledge that they aren't aware of the differences between the 4 words. So digitisation, that's what we've talked about today, the capture and conversion of analog to digital. Digitalisation, so that's a business process arising from digitisation. Just spotted some mistakes in my slides there. And then digital transformation. So that's the broader social benefit of all of these things in aggregate, the ease of access, the aggregation, the creation of new technologies. Because of digitalization and digitization, we can use AI, things like Peppal, which is you don't need to create an invoice. There's no keying, scanning. It's a transfer of metadata between 2 entities that allows for payment to happen automatically. That arises from digitalization of a business process. And then the last one is that digital preservation process, ensuring that all of your digital information is usable into the long term. I think I just want to close also just by touching on what the difference between knowledge and wisdom. So I've used this joke before. It's knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting a tomato in a fruit salad. Okay. Do we have any questions, Tyndall? Has anyone got any questions at all that they'd like to ask?
Yes. So we have one from Debbie from earlier. What is the name of the panel mentioned during planning, in brackets, strategic planning and execution slide?
Sure. Okay. Well, I'll make that available on the slide. It's the National Archives panel for the preservation and digitisation of paper materials. And there's a standing offer notice. If you go onto OzTender, you can find that. If you search National Archives Digitisation Panel, that will come up. Also, there's a panel for microfiche and microfilm and also aerial photography. There's also an AV panel. Those panels are excellent. To get onto those panels, there had to be site. It was more than just responding to a tender. There were sample scans. You had to have your equipment looked at. All of you. There was a real high bar to get on that panel. So if you're using a vendor from those panels, you can be assured that they know what they're doing. I hope that answered your question, and I'll send you those standing offer numbers with the slides. I'll make them available to everybody.
Great. Okay, and we've got another one from Lally. From your experience, how often do you run checksum to check for changes in metadata?
But generally speaking, checksums would normally have occurred. They were often a thing that came out of preservation digitisation in cultural institutions. They're more and more ubiquitous now. So you would check those at each key stage. So the checksums would really, anytime you move or change that metadata, you would automate the checking of those checksums. So as you do that transfer, it would fail. So your system, as you move them through your systems, a checksum failure would pop up, and then you'd be able to identify from that failure where it failed and potentially identify why it failed. So it might be when you moved it off of your scanning production area onto a hard drive and then off the hard drive again. It could be different versions of Adobe Acrobat, for example. Yeah, there's a whole range of reasons, but these use of checksums is really important. And yeah, you would do it at each key stage as the data and images are moved.
Perfect. And another one from Darren. Ignoring the use of specific commercial products, how do you manage the ongoing support for the digital format being used? For example, we have VHS tapes of interviews which need to be preserved. Do you regularly review the digital format for an archive and determine whether the format needs to be converted to a newer format?
Sure. Okay, so in the system that I discussed, and thank you, Darren, for the question, that's done automatically. So we have two systems that do that. One of them has a number of different file formats, and that it's done in real time, those format checks. If they're digital and in that asset, in that system, in a digital preservation system, how you would do that, if you had a VHS collection, I would say you would be aware that that's no longer a current format. So it can only really happen if the format is digital. So to answer your hopefully answer your question, if you've got a VHS or a Betamax format, well, that is obsolete already, unless you can get hold of an old, a bit of hardware off of the internet, perhaps. If it's in a digital preservation system, or sometimes in a collection management system, the system will know that automatically. So, for example, the one I talked about, Preservica, that has hundreds and hundreds of different file formats that it's able to monitor, and it does that through open source availability of those file formats. I hope that answered your question without being too salesy there with Preservica.
Okay, and another one from Michelle. How well does Checksum's software integrate with SharePoint and CastlePoint?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say that would be a question for an expert in SharePoint or for CastlePoint. I would imagine that CastlePoint would be would have a function in that. I don't know CastlePoint well. I know it by reputation. That strikes me as something that they would have covered off. SharePoint, not out of the box. Definitely not. I would be very surprised if that was something that happened out the box. But that would be something you'd need to speak to a SharePoint practitioner, someone who really understands it. I would say that would be a check that would happen prior to ingestion into SharePoint, but definitely something you'd want to do if it's going into SharePoint for sure, because the governance in SharePoint, as people know, can be challenging. Again, out the box, I'm not sure that is even possible. I think you'd need a third-party tool to be able to do that.
Okay, and another one from Lally. I am just curious if in digital preservation surrogates, derivatives are created, which records will become the source of truth?
Okay, so when you put thank you again for the question, Layli. When you put the file into the digital preservation system, what happens is there's the original file is kept, and a backup master is also created and put into deep storage. So you essentially have redundancy of your digital masters. The derivatives are for access only. So you will always have that original copy and a backup copy of those masters, and the derivatives would be for access use. So in terms of your source of truth, it would be your master file. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, anyone else with questions? Just looking at the chat. Lily said, okay, John. Anyone else with any questions? Otherwise, we may wrap up a little early.
I also just take the opportunity just to thank everybody for their support and help in getting the webinar off the ground. Everyone at RIMPA Global, everyone at DatacomIT. Also, just wanted to let you know we have another event upcoming with RIMPA Global on June the 19th. It's a hybrid event, so you can come in person to the CSU on Brisbane Avenue in Barton. Or you can join online as a webinar, and it's titled Guardians of Data, Securing PII in the Public Sector. That's all going to be all about managing PII in the public service, but it will also be about how you deal with private identifying information if you're wanting to use AI tools. So it will be really heavily focused on how we deal with PII if you want to use AI as well. So yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, and just thank you for everyone for coming along today. Thank you to everybody who asked questions. Thank you for putting up with me, keep clearing my my throat. And have a great day, everyone.
Thanks all, and thank you, John, again for that great presentation. And the slides and the recording will be sent out soon. So thank you all and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.